The Leak Mound Interpretive Trail is sponsored by the Federal Highway Administration, the Georgia Department of Transportation, and the University of West Georgia.
Hi, and welcome to another Leak Mounds Interpretive Trail podcast. I'm Marcus Stock.
And I'm Jennifer Teeter. If you're following along on the trail, this podcast corresponds to the Preserving the Past panel.
Today we're here at the Georgia Department of Transportation with archaeologists Pam Bachman and Terry Lottie. Can you talk really quickly, too, briefly, maybe the difference, like Phase 1, Phase 2, Phase 3?
Absolutely. Phase 1 is basically identification. It's the first thing you're going to do. And so we have standards for that. The Georgia Council of Professional Archaeologists and the State Historic Preservation Office and GDOT, we all have adopted the same kind of methods, and which are basically, you know, the parameters are you dig every 100 feet within your area of potential effects. That's how we define it. And so every 100 feet you're going to put in, and because we do everything metrically in archaeology, it's actually technically every 30 meters you will dig a shovel test, and the shovel test has to be at least 30 centimeters by 30 centimeters by 30 centimeters, roughly.
A circular shovel test.
Yeah.
With one shovel, and you screen the dirt, and you don't really, you keep levels to a certain extent by the shovelful, and then record whether or not you have any artifacts. And that level of work helps you identify areas that have artifacts and areas that don't. It's considered survey.
So you're kind of like probing a site almost to see.
Well, it's just your work area, so you're not, you don't, you know, you're going to dig it regardless every 30 meters.
Yeah.
So if you happen to find something, that's when you start moving into a different area. But
you're probing an area and looking for positive or negative.
Yeah.
And negative, no site. Positive, there's a site there. And then you would, you've identified a site. Survey then kind of moves to a secondary part where you try to delineate the boundaries of that site.
How big is it?
So you'd still do shovel tests, but you try to identify the limits of it. And the way you do that is you keep digging until you get negative, basically.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And then your phase 2 is going to be the point at which you decide if a site is potentially eligible or not and needs further study. So
you know you have one, but now is it an important, significant site, or is it just something that is known already? We talked about data potential. That's how sites are measured for their importance, their eligibility for the National Register of Historic Places. And all your federal environmental laws make sure that sites rise to that standard of eligibility. So the Phase 2 level is trying to determine whether or not a site rises to that standard. So you do a little more work, test units.
Yeah, units, and along with other shovel testing. And it really depends on the program and the area, what size your units are, but those are the square, the larger square windows, we'll call them windows, where we're starting to look at integrity and stratification and making sure that everything's to order, to standard, archaeologically speaking.
Digging in levels, horizontal levels, as opposed to by the shovelful, you keep more records, take soil readings, that kind of thing, because you're really trying to get at what components are represented, what occupation has occurred there, and then also what the integrity is, like Terry said. Has there been a significant amount of disturbance there? Because eligibility really includes both significance and integrity. So sites can be really important, but they can be mostly destroyed, and they won't be eligible. Or vice versa. Sites can be, have great integrity, but really not be anything significant. So both of those have to go together for a site to be eligible for the National Register, and that's kind of the two main questions that testing is really trying to get at. So, but also, like Terry said, you can use a lot of different methods. It depends on the site. It's just how can you get at those two questions for that particular site, and that usually involves these larger test units. So,
and then you move on to the mitigation, which I think is the phase 3, which I guess is what you were asking about.
Really large excavation.
Like a full-on excavation, pretty much.
A lot of times for archaeology, it's called data recovery because it implies that you're going to recover everything and not come back.
So how often, or what's the likelihood that a site moves from phase 1 to phase 3? How many end up in a full, approximately, or
That's a really, really good question, and it really depends on, for us, can we avoid the site completely with our design? Because if we can avoid the site completely with our design, then it pretty much stays as an unknown or potentially eligible site that we try to protect from us, basically. And us being, building roads.
Right.
But if we can only minimize or we can avoid, and the site has been, it's not very often, I'll tell you that we get a mitigation, because a lot of times, we're digging on the side of an existing road, so we might find pieces of a site, portions of a site, but a lot of times they don't contribute because they are so, what you would call, blown out by previous disturbances, whatever they be, a utility line or a road, or somebody built a driveway, or so it's not just us.
They don't have integrity, so
yeah.
They're not going to rise to that eligibility standard. You kind of have two different things that your question kind of gets at, because you have how many sites actually rise to the standard of eligibility, and then how many times do we actually get all the way to a phase 3? Because both of them are involved in the Section 106 process. Like Terry was saying, not every site's going to rise to that standard. And then for those sites that don't rise to the standard, the project proceeds. For the sites that do rise to that standard, our number one mandate is to avoid them. So we instantaneously go back to the design team and say, you need to avoid my eligible site. And they will do everything in their power to avoid it. Our second question is, if they come back and say, we cannot avoid it, we say, well, how much can you minimize harm to it? Can you move off, significantly, so that only 50% of the site is going to be destroyed, or 30% of the site is going to be destroyed, or 10% even? And that's our second question. And then that negotiation is made. If that negotiation is, we've moved off of it as much as we can and we can't move anymore, we have to have this portion of that site, then we would go to mitigation. That is the third step. But we always have to ask, avoid, minimize, then mitigate.
I really like that, Pam. Avoid, minimize, and mitigate. And to hear more about mitigation, you can listen to our mitigation podcast.
Thanks for listening to another Leak Mounds Interpretive Trail podcast.
The Leak Mounds Interpretive Trail project was done in partnership with the City of Cartersville and Bartow County. Music by Tommy Wildcat.